Hi, I'm Anitra. I was the one sitting in the back at my sister's rehearsal dinner, the one they called our beautiful little widow, like it was a joke wrapped in a compliment. They used my husband's death as a punchline, and then used my home, my memories, my silence to build their perfect wedding day. They erased my name, stole the house James left me, and turned my grief into a slideshow with music. But the worst part? They truly believed it'd stay quiet forever. What kind of family does that and still calls it love? The moment I stepped into the courtyard, the scent of magnolia and grilled shrimp hit me in waves, familiar, warm, and deeply out of place. Lanterns swung gently under the trees, casting gold over white linen tables and peach-colored napkins that screamed curated charm. I lingered at the gate for a beat too long before someone noticed me. That someone was Callista. "There she is!" she called, raising a flute of champagne. "Better late than never." I nodded with a practiced smile and slipped past a few guests I didn't recognize. Most were Callista's friends, the kind who wore designer clutches and carried conversations like weapons. I could hear Dorian laughing near the bar. I knew that laugh. Loud, performed, designed to be overheard. Wendell stood by the drink table, fiddling with the ice bucket, like he always did when he didn't want to be asked how he was. Lorraine was mid-story, holding court, wearing her best pearls and her best version of maternal delight. She hadn't seen me yet. Or maybe she had, and pretended otherwise. I took an empty seat near the edge, quietly sliding in as if I were apologizing for taking up space. I hadn't worn black, but I felt like I had. Being at an event like this after everything made my skin itch. But this was family, and I told myself too many times that I could endure it for one night. One dinner, one toast. Dorian approached with a drink in hand. His tie slightly loosened, eyes scanning the room as though it owed him attention. "For a second there," he said, grinning at me, "I thought you were the housekeeper." A few people laughed. It wasn't mean in tone, just careless, but sometimes carelessness cuts deeper than malice. I smiled back tightly. I'd learned how to tuck those moments into my chest and keep walking. I said nothing, just sipped the lukewarm sweet tea that suddenly tasted like chlorine. Lorraine chuckled awkwardly, fanning her neck. "Oh, Dorian." Callista didn't even flinch. She just smiled, that tight-lipped pageant expression she'd perfected in high school, and took another sip of champagne. No one called it out. No one thought it was cruel. Just Anitra being too sensitive again. The evening continued, dinner was served, and I poked at my food more than I ate it. Conversations floated past me like smoke. Honeymoon plans, vendor mishaps, real estate investments. I could have been anywhere else, and it wouldn't have made a difference. Eventually, Callista stood up, clinking her glass. The room hushed as she tapped a spoon against her flute with the authority of someone used to attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. "We're so lucky to be surrounded by people who love us and to be getting married at a place that means so much to our family." She went on about memories from childhood, about the oak tree that once split during a storm, and how they rebuilt the deck together. Lorraine dabbed at her eyes. Wendell nodded along, half listening. I stayed still, my fork untouched, beside a half-eaten roll. "And lastly," Callista said, lifting her glass higher, "to our beautiful little widow here, Anitra. May she find love again, hopefully with better luck this time." There was laughter. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Some looked at me, expecting me to chuckle along. A few raised their glasses. Someone even said, "Here's to second chances." I froze. It felt like every eye turned into a spotlight. My hands didn't move. I couldn't lift the glass. I couldn't blink. I could only remember James, my husband, whispering in my ear the last time we danced, "Don't let them shrink you." But they had. And Eid let them. I sat there, holding my breath until the toast ended, then stood up and excused myself as gently as I could, muttering something about needing fresh air. I didn't look at Callista. I didn't need to. I knew that smile. I'd grown up with it. The kitchen was quiet. One of the staff gave me a nod, busy rinsing a tray of silverware. I found a towel and started folding napkins, not because they needed folding, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I thought of James again, the way he used to reach across the table and squeeze my hand when someone said something tactless. How he would lean in after family dinners and whisper, "Let's get out of here." He had always known when I'd had enough, even before I did. But tonight, I was alone in this room of polite cruelty, folding napkins that weren't mine, for a wedding that didn't belong to me. I heard laughter echo from the courtyard. My family, what remained of it, was out there, toasting to new beginnings, while I hid behind countertops and stainless steel. Some wounds aren't loud. They grow in silence. They take root in empty seats and awkward jokes and toasts that are meant to entertain at someone else's expense. I glanced back toward the light and laughter. My heart didn't break, it adjusted, bent in ways I didn't know were possible. "It's starting again," I whispered, not to anyone in particular. Just to the walls, maybe, or to James, if he was listening. I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, though maybe I should have been, but because her voice echoed all night like it had been carved into the walls. "Little widow." I turned those words over 100 times, trying to decide if she'd meant it to be cruel or if it was just another instance of her needing the spotlight, no matter whose grief she had to stand on to reach it. The morning light bled through the thin curtains of my old bedroom, warming the familiar walls, but not my chest. This room used to be mine. Now it was a guest space, repainted, redecorated, no trace of the girl who used to dream in it. I sat up slowly, careful not to make the bed creak too loudly. The house was still, but it was never truly quiet. Not in this family. I made my way down the hallway, following the faint sound of Lorraine humming in the kitchen. She was always up early during events, setting out coffee, rearranging napkins that didn't need rearranging. I passed through the foyer without thinking, then stopped mid-step. There was a memorial table set up by the front window. It was supposed to honor our loved ones who had passed. Framed black and white photos, flickering candles, a floral arrangement that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I walked closer. There was a printed board, "Forever in Our Hearts," with names listed beneath. I scanned the list. Grandpa Leo, Aunt Marcia, Cousin Stephen, but no James. My eyes narrowed. There was a faint smudge under the glass frame, like someone had tried to remove something from beneath the laminate. I leaned closer. His name was there once. I could see the faded outline. But someone had crossed it out. With a pen. The ink trailed over his name, with firm, deliberate pressure. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A decision. I stared at it longer than I meant to. My hand went cold around the coffee mug I hadn't realized I was still holding. When I turned, Lorraine was standing behind me, drying her hands on a dish towel. "We didn't want it to be heavy," she said, voice soft like a guilty whisper. Callista thought, "Well, it's her weekend, you know?" I said nothing. She offered a smile, brittle and strained. "It's about moving forward." "It always is, isn't it?" "Forward as long as I stay behind." I walked out before I said something I'd regret. Outside, the porch was already warming up under the Georgia sun. I sat with my coffee, though it had gone cold. The rocking chair creaked beneath me as I leaned back, trying to slow the churn in my chest. This house used to be a place of celebration, of family. James had sat here beside me so many times during Thanksgiving mornings, or summer evenings, when the fireflies drifted low and lazy. Now, his name wasn't even allowed to sit inside. They hadn't just erased a name. They'd erased the memory of a man who used to fix broken porch steps, who brought flowers for Lorraine on Mother's Day even after I forgot, who helped Wendell replace the fence without ever asking to be thanked. He'd belonged here. But now, somehow, I didn't. And the silence made me complicit. Later that day, I found Wendell by the shed, fiddling with tools that didn't need fixing. I walked up slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Did you know they left James off the memorial?" I asked. He didn't look up, just kept tightening a bolt with a wrench that wasn't connected to anything. "I don't get into those things," he mumbled. That was his answer for everything he didn't want to stand up for. Those things, like memory, like marriage, like dignity. I nodded, more to myself than to him. So it wasn't an accident. It was a consensus. They didn't want James here. And by extension, they didn't want the part of me that still clung to him. That night, I couldn't shake the weight of it. I opened drawers in the guest room, mostly out of habit. In the bottom of the old desk, buried beneath a bundle of linen and place cards, I found it. A printed guest list from 2 weeks ago. Unused. James' name was there. Clear as day. No pen marks, no strike-throughs. Just a name among others. I held it in my hands like a fragile piece of proof. Not just of him, but of me. Of the fact that I wasn't making this up. That I hadn't imagined the love we'd built or the space we'd earned. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my pocket. They might be able to change the decor. They might control the toasts, the playlists, the seating charts, but they couldn't control what I remembered, what I kept, what I refused to let go of. If they wanted to erase him, it'd keep the evidence that he was real, that he had been here, that I hadn't imagined any of it. The air inside the sunroom was thick with the scent of lilies and heated fabric. I stood near the doorway, one hand tucked into my pocket, the other loosely holding a glass of water that I hadn't touched. Sunlight spilled across the floor, highlighting every thread in the lace gown that hung perfectly off Callista's frame. My mother stood beside her, tugging at the hem like it mattered, like this moment needed one more adjustment to be picture perfect. They had transformed the room into a makeshift bridal suite. Mirrors leaned against the walls. A folding table lined with brushes and makeup palettes sat behind Callista, who was already posing like she belonged in the cover of a wedding magazine. Maybe she did. Maybe she always had. I can't believe how well it fits. Lorraine beamed, her hands pressed together like she was trying not to clap. Just like it was made for you. It was, wasn't it? Callista asked, turning toward me. I didn't answer. No one seemed to remember the dozens of times Lorraine had said that dress was mine. I could still hear her voice from years ago, soft and certain, after finding the vintage gown in my grandmother's trunk. It's yours, baby. One day, when it's your turn. Turns out, I must be missed mine. Callista twirled slowly, the tool brushing the rug. You won't need it now, will you? Her voice was syrupy, sweet-laced with poison. I smiled, but not in a way anyone would mistake as warm. Then I excused myself, slipping out before I could decide whether to scream or laugh. I wandered down the hallway into my old room, still labeled guest room on the printed itinerary Lorraine made for relatives. I was supposed to find a childhood photo album for the slideshow later, but instead, I opened the closet, not really knowing what I was looking for. On the top shelf, tucked behind a pile of folded blankets, was a battered file folder I didn't recognize. My fingers brushed the edge, and I pulled it down. Inside were documents, letters, a manila envelope with James' handwriting on it. My heart thudded louder than my footsteps. I sat down on the edge of the bed and began to flip through the pages. The final page stopped me cold. It was a copy of the property deed for the lake house, the one James had left to me, the one he bought so we could host family every 4th of July, the one he died before we ever got to finish remodeling together. A pink sticky note was attached. Transferred title to Callista. Shell put it to better use. Lorraine's handwriting. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I felt the room tilt, but I stayed perfectly still. The paper crinkled in my hand, and I forced my breathing to slow. They had transferred it without telling me. During the weeks I was sleeping on a mattress alone, barely eating, while I was still wearing his shirts just to smell him. While I was grieving, they were redistributing his legacy. Not because they had to, because they could. I folded the document, placed it back in the folder, and slid it under my arm. Then I walked out. Later that afternoon, I drove out to the lake house. The gravel crunched under my tires like it was chewing on the past. The grass was trimmed. The front porch had been stained a new color. The garden beds had fresh mulch. Someone had touched every corner of the place, but it hadn't been me. I walked the perimeter slowly, like I was retracing someone else's footprints. James had picked this place because it was quiet. "Well, wake up with mist on the water," he'd said. "Start our mornings slow." Now it was scheduled for a wedding photo shoot at 4 p.m. sharp. They hadn't just taken the property. They'd stolen the meaning. My memories had been scrubbed, and in their place stood flower arches and photo props. It's one thing to lose someone. It's another to lose what they left behind. As the sun began to set, I sat on the dock, legs dangling just over the water. I pulled the folded note from my pocket again and read it, this time letting the words cut me. Shell put it to better use. They turned my grief into a backdrop. That night, back at the house, I passed by Callista's room. She was sitting at the desk with Lorraine, giggling over something on her laptop. I caught a glimpse of the screen as I passed. The lake house, a mock-up of their wedding invitation, with a glossy photo of the deck and water mid-sunset. The tagline read, "Where love begins again." I kept walking, quiet, calm, but something in me was no longer grieving. It was sharpening. I left the lake house just before sunset, the folded property documents pressed tightly against my ribs like armor. By the time I pulled into the driveway back at Lorraine's, the lights in the living room were already glowing, and a line of SUVs hugged the curb. I hadn't known there would be a bridal shower tonight. No one thought to tell me. Or maybe someone had, and I was expected to read between the lines like always. Inside, the house had been transformed against Reamers, champagne glasses with sugared rims, pastel balloons shaped into wedding bells. Callista's friends were everywhere, laughing with that same breathless pitch women use when they're trying to outsmile each other. Lorraine stood near the fireplace, clutching a wrapped gift like it was holy. "Anitra!" someone called. "You made it!" I gave a tight nod and stayed close to the wall. No one noticed I hadn't brought a gift. No one asked me to speak or raise a toast. I was a placeholder, an accessory, just enough to say she was there. A projector had been set up near the mantel, and chairs were quickly pulled into rows. "We have a surprise for the bride," one of Callista's friends said, barely containing her excitement. Something really special. I felt a chill before the lights even dimmed. The video began with soft piano music and clips of Callista as a child learning to ride a bike, blowing out candles, posing at prom. Then came photos of her and Dorian, curated like a luxury brand ad. I sat still, willing my hands not to tremble. Then it shifted. A grainy video began to play, and my breath caught before I fully registered what it was. Me standing at James' casket, my hand resting on the lid, my face pale, blotchy, crying. Then a voice began to speak, not mine, not Callista's. James's. "You were always my calm in every storm. I never had to search for home. You were already there." It was the letter. The one he'd written just before the accident. The one I'd folded into the back of my journal. The journal I hadn't seen since last week, when Lorraine said she was tidying up the guest room. My mouth went dry. I wanted to stand. I wanted to stop it. But I couldn't move. The room sighed. Some women dabbed at their eyes. Someone whispered, "So beautiful." But not for me. The video ended with Callista smiling beside me at James' service, like grief was just another photo op. The lights came back on, and there was applause. Someone turned to me and said, "That was such a sweet tribute. Your sister really honors you." I didn't answer. I walked straight to the kitchen, where Lorraine was uncorking another bottle of champagne. "How did you get that letter?" My voice was low but sharp. She didn't even flinch. "Callista found it while going through your things. She said it was lovely. We thought it would be meaningful." "We?" She shrugged. "It's a good reminder of what love looks like." I stepped closer. It was mine. That letter was for me, not for a slideshow, not for Callista's stage. She looked at me like I was being difficult again. "Honey, sometimes things are bigger than just one person." "No," I said. "Sometimes people take what doesn't belong to them and pretend it's generosity." I left before I said more. I drove back to the lake house that night, needing to breathe air that didn't smell like fake joy. The porch light had been left on, illuminating the steps we'd built together. I stepped inside, flipped the breaker to shut off the electricity, and stood in the silence. I pulled out the manila envelope James had left me. Tucked inside was a copy of our marriage certificate, still folded crisp, untouched. I ran my fingers over the raised seal. They could take my space. They could turn my pain into poetry, but they would not take my name, my history, my voice. Back at Lorraine's, I didn't return to the party. I sat in the guest room, pulled my old notebook from my bag, and wrote one line across a fresh page. The next time they say my name, it won't be with a whisper. The clinking of forks and the hum of conversation had long faded into the background by the time I started rinsing dishes. Lorraine had gone upstairs to change out the tablecloths for tomorrow's brunch, leaving just me and Callista in the kitchen, your first moment alone since the bridal shower ambush. She stood near the counter, slowly twisting the cap back onto the bottle of wine we hadn't even finished. I stacked the plates, rinsing each one carefully, more for the sake of not looking at her than anything else. "You know," she began, her voice soft, casual like we were just two sisters folding laundry, "I really do want you to find happiness. But it's hard, because every time I look at you, I just see the funeral." The plate slipped in my hand for a second, caught in midair before it could shatter. I turned off the faucet. Slowly, deliberately, wiped my hands on the towel. Then I faced her. "Maybe that's why you keep borrowing everything of mine," I said, trying to rewrite what you couldn't control. Her smile faltered, just a flicker. "Excuse me?" "The dress, the house, the letter, all of it. You take pieces of my life and parade them like accessories to your own." She scoffed. "Don't be dramatic, Anitra. This isn't about you." "No," I nodded. "It never is." "That's the trick, right? You can hurt someone all you want, as long as you say it with a smile and call it a tribute." She stepped forward, voice dropping lower. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I leaned in, close enough for only her to hear. "Keep pushing, Callista, and you'll find I don't stay quiet out of weakness. I stay quiet because I'm deciding how loud I want to be." She blinked. Just once. A crack in the glass. Then she laughed, a breathy, performative little sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "God, you're exhausting." I picked up the last plate and set it carefully on the drying rack. "Funny. I was just thinking the same about you." Without another word, I turned and left the kitchen. I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of turning around. Upstairs in the guest room, I dug through the drawer beside the bed. The wedding invitation mock-up sat right where I'd left it. That glossy photograph of the lake house. That perfect caption, "Where love begins again." I crossed it out with a black pen. Then, below it, in clean handwriting, I wrote, "Where grief ends today." I folded it twice and slipped it into the inner pocket of my purse. That was my vow. I didn't need vows made in dresses stolen from dead promises. I didn't need to recite words in someone else's borrowed dream. I had my own. Later that night, I heard laughter echo down the hallway. Callista's laugh. But there was something different in it, high-pitched and strained, like someone performing a melody they no longer believed in. I didn't feel triumphant, just clear. I stood by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the lawn like a warning. She thought I was done grieving. She was about to meet the part of me that mourns nothing. By the time I arrived at the lake house for the rehearsal walkthrough, the sun had started to fall behind the tall pine trees that lined the property. Everything looked polished, overly staged, like someone had tried too hard to scrub the past off the wood grain. Fresh gravel, neatly arranged candles in hurricane jars along the deck, and new floral arrangements by the entrance, all in Callista's approved shades of blush and champagne. I kept to the edges, walking slowly around the garden bed James and I had dug the summer after we bought the place. The hydrangeas had survived, barely. I knelt and pulled out a weed, not because it mattered anymore, but because it was the only thing in that moment that felt honest. Up ahead, Lorraine and Callista stood side by side with the event planner, pointing at the layout. Callista had a clipboard. Of course she did. Dorian trailed behind them, sipping a cold beer, looking exactly like a man who had shown up late and still thought he was in charge. No one noticed me at first, which is probably why I noticed the board. It had been propped up at the center of the reception hall, easel-mounted, backlit by twinkle lights. At the top, it read, "Family and friends who made this day possible." I stepped closer, instinctively scanning for my name. Nothing. The list was long. Dozens of names. Cousins, friends of Lorraine's from her church circle, a handful of vendors. But not me. Not the person who had signed over the venue, coordinated the delivery schedules when Callista forgot, and literally built the first fire pit here with her husband. Not the one who lost that husband before she ever got to use this place as anything but a quiet refuge for pain. I turned to Dorian, who had just noticed me. He blinked, then cleared his throat. "Oh, that must have been an oversight," he said, with the smile of someone who didn't actually care whether it was or not. Lorraine busied herself with the centerpiece. Callista smirked, didn't even glance my way. "Interesting," I said quietly. "How I'm good enough to host, but not good enough to name." No one replied. I didn't give them a chance to. I walked out of the room and didn't stop until I was back inside the kitchen of the main house. I pulled one of the mock-up wedding invitations from a drawer near the pantry, turned it over, and wrote a single sentence on the back. This venue didn't appear by accident. Then I pinned it to the corkboard, between the Wi-Fi password and a printed schedule for brunch seating. Lorraine must-have found it later. I saw her glance at it during breakfast and quietly peel it down without a word. No one mentioned it. But the air shifted after that just slightly, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees, even though the thermostat never changed. Voices got softer when I entered the room. Callista stopped pretending to hug me in front of guests. Dorian avoided eye contact entirely. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I drove back out to the venue. The staff had left a few lights on for morning setup. I slipped inside the reception hall, the walls still humming faintly with the memory of their indifference. At the guest book table, I placed a small photo of me and James in a silver frame. It wasn't flashy, no ribbon, no caption. Just the two of us laughing on the front porch in the middle of a paint job gone wrong. Our hands were stained with color. Our faces were bright with everything they never got to see. I didn't tell anyone I'd put it there. I just left it, because if they wouldn't name me, I'd leave proof that I existed. The next morning, I returned with Lorraine and Callista for the final walkthrough. Everything looked exactly the same, except for the spot where the photo had been. Gone. In its place sat a crisp white card, written in Lorraine's cursive. "Love begins with letting go." I didn't speak, not because I had nothing to say, but because if I opened my mouth right then, I was going to give them more than words. They didn't just erase me, they replaced me. And I've let them for the last time. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restored ballroom downtown, the kind of place where chandeliers never stopped sparkling and everything smelled faintly of citrus and old money. I arrived just after 7, slipping through the side entrance. It told myself I wasn't going to stay long, just enough to keep up appearances. The tables were dressed in ivory linens. Name cards were calligraphed in gold. Waiters in black vests floated by with trays of Prosecco and smoked salmon blinnies. Callista glowed, not because of the lighting, but because everyone there was a mirror, reflecting her back to herself. I found a seat near the back, away from the main table. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did and decided not to acknowledge me. Either way, it was quieter there. Halfway through the meal, just after the lemon tartlets were cleared, someone dimmed the lights. A projector flickered on against the far wall, and a screen came down from the ceiling with all the theatrical flair of a Broadway opener. "Surprise!" one of Callista's bridesmaids said into the mic. "We put together something special for the bride and groom." The screen glowed white, then bloomed into color photos of Callista and Dorian on the beach, kissing under string lights, laughing mid-champagne toast. The music was soft, sentimental, perfectly engineered. And then it shifted. Without warning, the screen cut to a grainy clip. It took me half a second to recognize it. Me, standing at James' casket, hand trembling, eyes red, grief exposed, uninvited. The camera zoomed in slowly. Over the footage, in looping cursive, appeared the words, "Forever widow, but maybe she'll smile tomorrow." Laughter, not loud, not raucous, but enough to make my heart thud against my ribs like a warning. Lorraine gave a tight smile and glanced around nervously. Callista laughed, full-bodied, unfiltered, like this was the punchline to a long joke she'd been waiting to deliver. I stood. Slowly. My chair scraped gently across the floor, a sound louder than any voice in that moment. I walked to the front of the room, picked up an untouched wineglass from a nearby table, tapped it twice. The room fell quiet. I looked directly at Callista, then turned to face the guests. "Thank you," I said, "for reminding me what this family really thinks grief looks like." No one moved. "You took my tears," I continued, "and turned them into your punchline. You took my love story and made it your wedding prop." My voice was calm, controlled, sharp enough to cut glass. Dorian shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the inside of his jacket pocket. Callista rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Anitra." It was supposed to lighten the mood. I turned to her. "You've never been the light," I said. "Only the eraser." There was no comeback, no laugh this time. I placed the wineglass back on the table and walked out. Simple as that. Wendell followed me as far as the double doors, but didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence had always been the loudest part of him. Back at the hotel, I unlocked my suitcase and pulled out the envelope I'd tucked away 2 days ago. Inside was the deed to the lake, house still in my name, despite Lorraine's note. I slid it into my handbag, zipped it closed, and sat for a moment on the edge of the bed. They'd wanted to humiliate me, to fold my pain into their joy like it was confetti. But grief isn't decorative. It doesn't serve hors d'oeuvres. It doesn't fit on a slideshow. "They want to laugh at me?" I whispered. "Let's see them laugh without a venue." Somewhere across town, Callista's phone buzzed on the linen-covered table next to her dessert plate. The venue manager's voice crackled through the line. "Hi, sorry to call during your event, but we may have an issue with your location contract." She stared at the screen, confused. The morning sun poured through the bridal suite windows, like it had no idea what the night before had cost me. But I was calm, centered, sharpened. Down the hall, Callista was already in hair and makeup, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by women who spoke in sparkles and half-whispers. Lorraine was pacing near the staircase, flipping through her clipboard and muttering about seating charts. I watched them both from the bottom of the stairs and marveled at how a person could orchestrate so much without ever really seeing the damage they'd done. Then I saw him, Elias. He stepped inside quietly, holding a manila envelope as if it were made of glass. His clothes were simple button-down shirt, old boots, but his presence cut through the room like a truth no one invited. He nodded toward the hallway. I followed him out the back door, into the quiet of the garden. "It's time," he said, handing me the envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside was a notarized copy of James' original will. A full copy complete with signatures, a witness statement, and a very clear clause in bold ink. The lake house property and any rights to lease, sell, or use it for commercial events are granted solely to Anitra Caldwell. No event may occur on the property without her written consent. I blinked once, then again. A gust of wind rustled the crepe myrtle beside us. "You didn't know?" Elias asked. I shook my head. "Why now?" He looked away. "James told me to hold it. Said he knew what your family was capable of. Told me to give it to you when they forgot who you were." I folded the will carefully and slid it back into the envelope. They didn't forget. They never believed I mattered to begin with. 10 minutes later, I walked into the bridal suite. The room went quiet. Foundation brushes paused mid-air. Callista's eyes flicked to the envelope, then to my face. I didn't speak right away, just handed her the envelope and stepped back. She looked at it, then passed it to Lorraine, who unfolded it like it might bite. As her eyes scanned the first page, all the color drained from her face. "Where did you get this?" "It's not stolen," I said evenly. "It's mine. James wrote it, he signed it, and it's been legally filed." Callista snatched it from her and read it herself. "You waited until today?" "No," I said. "You made today the day. I just made sure it ended with the truth." There was a knock at the door. A staff member stepped in awkwardly. "Sorry to interrupt, but the venue has received a legal document. The wedding is on hold until further clarification." Callista looked like she might scream. Dorian walked in, saw her face, then looked at me. "What's happening?" "I guess you'll need a new venue," I said. Outside the suite, murmurs had already begun. Some guests were wandering the hallway, confused. Word was spreading, and I hadn't said a single word more than necessary. Lorraine tried to pull me aside. "Anitra, this is going too far. You're embarrassing the family." "No," I said. "I'm showing them exactly what this family looks like when no one plays along." She didn't respond, just watched me turn and walk away. I stepped out the front door and into the sun, envelope still in my hand. Guests were standing around the valet podium. A few looked my way. I didn't care. Let them look. At the edge of the gravel driveway, I paused. I didn't burn anything down. I just turned on the lights. The morning after felt hollow and clean, like a room just after it's been cleared of furniture. I stood in the doorway of my apartment for a few seconds before going in. The quiet hit harder than I expected. No floral arrangements, no seating charts, no passive-aggressive tension thick in the air. On the kitchen counter sat three things: my suitcase, the original deed to the lake house, and the sealed letter from James. I hadn't touched it since Elias handed it to me months ago. I didn't need it to win yesterday. But maybe I needed it now for me. I brewed a cup of coffee and let the silence breathe around me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of silence. I welcomed it. The voicemail came around noon. Lorraine. Her voice trembled a little, like she wasn't sure which version of herself she needed to be. "We didn't mean to hurt you. I wish you had talked to us before. Everything." I didn't return the call. 15 minutes later, a text from Wendell lit up the screen. "Proud of you." No emojis, no ellipses, just words. The kind he didn't say when James died, or when I came home alone. But maybe this was his way of saying it now. Callista didn't reach out. That absence, oddly enough, felt like a gift. A clean cut. The next day, I drove out to the lake house alone. The road twisted in the same way James and I used to laugh about. How it made you earn the view. I kicked off my shoes at the shoreline and walked barefoot through the soft dirt and pine needles. The water was still, smooth as glass. I sat on the dock and opened James' final letter. It was short. His handwriting steady, even as he must have known time was slipping. "You'll know when to stop surviving and start living again. You won't need permission. You'll just know." I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. The tears didn't sting this time. They warmed, like something melting back into place. By the end of that week, I had my lawyer send out a formal notice. Retroactive nullification of any unauthorized use of the lake house. It was quiet. No press, no spectacle, just paperwork. But it hit exactly where it needed to. Later, I heard through a mutual friend that Callista's PR campaign lost 2 major clients. Something about ethical inconsistencies. I didn't celebrate it. I just noted it like watching a boat slowly drift away from a shore you no longer belong to. I didn't go on vacation. I didn't change my hair. I didn't even buy a new outfit. Instead, I boxed up James' books and donated them to the library on River Street. The woman behind the counter asked if they were part of an estate. I told her no. Just a beginning. I started volunteering for a grief group at the community center on Saturdays. At first, I just made coffee and laid out muffins. Eventually, I sat in the circle. Then one day, I spoke. Not about James, not about Callista, just about what it meant to be the one left behind and what it means to stay. A few weeks later, I ran into Elias at a coffee shop downtown. We sat for a while, talked about weather, lawns, the little things that make up a life. There was no romance, no promises, just presence. And for the first time, I wasn't looking for a grand epiphany. I already had it. Grief doesn't vanish. It folds, tucks itself into corners, makes room. But so does love. And sometimes, love looks like walking away so you can return to yourself.